Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, desolations, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot, and while everybody's talking about the missing Malaysian airliner and the events in Ukraine, Syria drags on. And we had a couple of recent stories that show that things are shifting a little bit, or at least plodding along at the same pace, at the very least. So what we have is on March 19th, there were Israeli strikes in Syria, and there was a roadside bombing that wounded 4 Israeli soldiers. And so Israel immediately retaliated against military sites, and that's one of the things that makes this different. There's a couple of things about this strike that make a difference. One is that Israel has publicly declared the attacks, and that these attacks weren't for the destruction of weapons going to Hezbollah as usual. And there was an attack just a month ago as well. But this time, the targets were Syrian military targets, a Syrian military headquarters, a Syrian military training facility, and Syrian military artillery batteries. So this really sets it apart. This is under normal circumstances would be an act of war, and I'm really surprised. Well, I shouldn't be surprised, but it would appear that Israel continues to pursue its own policy in Syria. While the attention is off them, they are escalating their efforts, and these are pretty provocative. And as usual, it's hard to justify if there is an explosion near the border in the Golan Heights and Israeli soldiers are wounded. There are any number of actors that could be responsible for this situation. So for Israel to immediately launch military strikes against Syrian military government sites in Syria is very, very provocative indeed. And this idea that anyone and everyone has to pay for Jewish casualties is a striking policy, and the words being used are very striking and belligerent as well. Netanyahu came out and said, quote, "Our policy is clear. We hurt those who hurt us," unquote. And a professor, Yadlin, at the University of Tel Aviv came out and said as well, quote, "When the other side changes the rules of the game, Israel has made it clear it carries a very high price. I think Assad understands the price," unquote. So very belligerent words for something that's not necessarily a very provocative act on the side of the Assad Syrian government. And now we also have Turkey has shot down a Syrian jet, and this is also a very provocative act. Just crossed over into Turkish airspace. Once again, there's all sorts of interesting activities going on in Syria, of course, and they are going to be these sort of transgressions. And to be on this hair trigger situation doesn't help the situation at all. And it's rather interesting that Erdogan's language echoes that we see from Netanyahu. Erdogan came out and said, quote, "A Syrian plane violated our airspace. Our F-16s took off and hit this plane. Why? Because if you violate my airspace, our slap after this will be hard," unquote. So we have a lot of saber rattling going on from Turkey and Israel towards Syria. And it's just interesting to see these provocative acts of war that will go unaddressed, at least for the time being, and probably will escalate as the attention is now elsewhere. And both Israel and Turkey can act with relative impunity against anything going on in that region around Syria. And it's kind of interesting as well, too, that the Golan Heights that Israel annexed from Syria in 1967 are not internationally recognized. So this is another situation that echoes recent events, including the referendum in Crimea, when Israel can go ahead and redraw the borders and annex part of Syria, the Golan Heights, into Israel without any international recognition whatsoever and against international law. And And so now it appears there will be no Syrian intervention for the time being, but who knows? Is there going to be an intervention further on down the road when there's more attrition and the Assad government finds itself even weaker? But in the meantime, we have this proxy war going on, and Israel will probably continue to push buttons. There's talk that they may enter Lebanon again to strike at Hezbollah, and it seems likely that they will continue to strike with impunity inside Syria, what would normally be acts of war. And so it goes. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.